Priya, you've said that your career is a master class in storytelling, but if we go back to the very beginning, if I was to open that book to chapter 1 before the success, what was the moment that you realized my voice matters here?
I think the first time that it really hit me that my voice mattered is when I started mentoring high school girls. And that would have been 5 years ago. And I think I really realized in that moment, I always knew that other people's voices could make a difference and that as a journalist, I could help those voices make a difference. But in that mentorship, that was the first time I saw the impact of my own voice actually changing lives. So yeah, I think that would be a really profound moment for me. And, connecting now when I look back, I see other moments where that happened. But that was a really profound moment of seeing the impact of my voice.
So what would you say your mission is now? And has that changed from where you started? Because you moved from a newsroom with like no connections to hosting to a national morning show in 5 years. So I'm curious, how did that end up? What do I need to understand about that early version of you to how you ended up to where you're at now?
Yeah. My passion for storytelling, my interest in stories goes back to when I was a little kid. I was that kid who on summer break, I was lugging the stack of books home from the library that I could barely carry. I was, in my room for hours reading anything I could get my hands on. And I was very much a daydreamer. Those books were kind of my escape into whatever world I was diving into in the book. And as I got older, I saw the power of stories in elevating the voices of underrepresented groups. And that was really my passion, where my passion for journalism came from. So I studied journalism during college. And then, as you said, I went on to be a news anchor, morning show host. I worked in a smaller newsroom. And I was in a city of about 400,000 people to where I started my career. And I always had this dream of living in a bigger city. And I finally got this opportunity about 5 years into my career. I was asked to move to Toronto, so biggest media market in Canada, to fill in for a year on the largest national morning show here. So you can think of it for your American audience as the equivalent of Good Morning America, the Canadian version.
It's huge.
Yeah, it was such a huge opportunity, especially for someone who didn't have those industry connections. And the way I built relationships, the way I built a personal brand for myself was using storytelling. I learned pretty quickly that I wasn't going to differentiate myself by going to meeting executives and leaders and saying, oh, I have 5 years of experience. I've been working on a morning show for this long. This is what I accomplish in a day. I knew that I really had to set myself apart. So one of the first stories I remember telling in that vein of really building a brand for myself in the industry was after I graduated from college, I took a detour. I went to South Korea and taught English. And that's where I saw the power of story in connecting people of different cultures and different backgrounds. And that experience I brought back with me to the newsroom. And that's why I'm able to tell stories, to build segments, to conceptualize ideas that connect not just with our existing audience, but that bring in new people to our shows. So that became an entry point to my story that really helped to set me apart. And I don't know that I necessarily did every single thing intentionally at the time, but when I look back, that's how I was differentiating myself. And that storytelling skill really helped me to pivot, because then I pivoted from my journalism career to a career in tech. And then I pivoted to a career in coaching, which is what I do now. And the common thread through all of that has been the ability to tell a powerful story that really connects with the people I need to connect with.
So, most people think that storytelling is something that you just see in theatrics, right? Like we go to a musical theater show, we see a story. We go to a play, we see a story. And I've seen this a lot. Like when I watch TED Talks, there's something about a compelling story that makes you pay attention. But you say that it's a tool for power. So I'm really curious for you, how do you think that storytelling actually changes, especially as a woman, our trajectory in a boardroom, in an email, in a negotiation? Why does it matter? What sets this apart?
As women, we are so conditioned to be in the background, to minimize our success, to not take up too much space, to give credit to others. The team did this. We did this, right? Instead of focusing on ourselves. And this is a pattern I really noticed throughout my career, both in TV and in the world of tech. I worked at companies like Slack and Salesforce, and I saw so many women around me who were high performers, high achievers. And when executives would say to them, "Oh, how did you end up working at Salesforce?" "Oh, I started in sales 5 years ago, and yeah, just kind of worked my way up, and here I am." And that executive would move along. They're not going to remember that story. And what happens when we do that is that other people don't take us seriously. Other people now don't see us as the person for the next opportunity, right? We give up our power in those moments when we don't share our goals, when we don't talk about the value we're bringing to the table. And the reality is, most men are very comfortable saying, "Oh, I was a top performer at my previous role. I was recruited to Salesforce. I've been here for 5 years, and every single year I've been a top performer, and I've been at President's Club." Right. And so, but for a lot of women, that's just not comfortable. And so for me, the power of storytelling is that you can talk about your value. You can share your impact, but you can do it through story. So rather than coming out in a way that feels uncomfortable for you, you can share the story of how you ended up where you are. So for example, "Oh, how did you end up working here?" Well, 5 years ago, I dreamed of moving to New York City. I was living in Denver, Colorado. And I grew up dreaming of New York. And one day I was at Starbucks. I met a recruiter who was recruiting for jobs in New York. I submitted my resume. I ended up coming to New York, sleeping on their couch for 2 weeks while I did interviews. And that's how I got my first tech job. And I was a top performer at that company. I was recruited to a larger company. And I was so excited when I got the call to come to Salesforce. I've been here for 2 years now. And one of my goals this year is actually to move into leadership now that I have 5 years of experience, right? And so all of a sudden, you've been able to tell this story in a way that's just, I'm just telling you my story rather than I'm here bragging and being arrogant about my experience.
Yeah, you're hired. That was great. But there's two things I want to touch on. The first thing is I kind of want to dig into the difference between men and women here, right?
Yeah.
As a woman, you've worked in media. I'm sure that you have seen firsthand what it's like to be a woman in a man's world, right? And then touching on even being in the boardroom, how men are more likely and almost maybe more accepted to talk about themselves. What have you noticed in terms of differences between men and women, and why is storytelling helpful for women especially?
Yes. So, you're 100% right. When I worked in the media world, I think it's like in many industries, that's just happens to be where my experience is. But a lot of the experiences that happened there were those subtle microaggressions, those subtle reminders that you don't have as much power. So it was things like, I was a producer and a news anchor. There were men in the newsroom who had the exact same job title as me. And the news director, who's sort of the manager and the main decision maker in the newsroom, would walk by, speak to my colleague who was a man sitting next to me. "Oh, what's the main story today? What are you leading with? What's the angle?" And then turn to me and say, "You look nice today." And then walk away, or make sure you lead with this story. No conversation, no asking. But those little things that reminded me that my opinion wasn't as valid, right? You're here to look nice. He's here for his brain. And
Ooh.
I think, right, I've heard so many women say it's not just media. This happens in technology. It happens in the legal profession. It happens everywhere, right? You're even say like, oh, I know that feeling. And so, I mean, unfortunately, it is very common. And those subtle reminders are a lot harder to call out and to deal with than actually when someone just says something to you, right? Not that I'm advocating for, for anyone to be directly sexist or discriminatory or racist, but when those things happen, you can call them out. But those subtle differences in how you're treated, they impact you, but they're a lot harder to actually call out and to erase and to deal with. So I think those are really, really common. Those are the things that sort of slowly take away your power. And then similarly in the boardroom, I know for me, when I started in the world of tech, I could see when a man would walk into the room, it was just automatically assumed, oh yeah, he belongs here. Like the conversations, oh, how's it going? Whatever, how long you been here, And then I would walk in and it was like, so what's your role? Because I'm just assuming you're really junior because you're a woman of color. Okay. Oh, you're leading this conversation. How did that happen? Right. And so this constant as a woman having to be at your very best, prove yourself, let everyone know in those first minutes, you need to speak in a way that's elevated, sophisticated, set yourself apart, let them know that you deserve to be there. And these are the things that I wish didn't exist. And I think especially as you're navigating that kind of mid stage of your career, 5 to 10 years in, like so many of us want to fight back against the system. And I respect the people who do. And then there's also this other side of, well, maybe I just need to play within the system for now. And then as I rise, then I can start to be that person who makes changes. I can be that person who leads in a different way. So when I work with people, I'm really working to help them navigate that in a way that makes the most sense for them. Because claiming in your power and stepping into your power doesn't mean the same thing for every person, right?
Yeah, and I think what I'm hearing is that we live in a misogynistic world. Let's just call a spade a spade.
Yeah.
It's gotten better, but there's a lot of internal misogyny that still exists. There's a lot of misogyny that exists in the workplace. I've experienced it. Many women listening right now have experienced it, and 70% of women. This was kind of crazy. I was reading about this. 70% of women minimize their success. So why do you think we've been so conditioned to play small? Do you think that it's the society that teaches us that it's safer to be small? And is it scary to start your storytelling and to step up to that? And where does someone start?
Yes, definitely. I think it's conditioning, and there are layers for different people too, right? Like for me, I definitely there's some cultural elements, and I think a lot of your listeners, I'm sure, will resonate with that. Depending on your own ethnic background and cultural background, there may be even more pressure to stay in the background, to not be someone who stands out. Don't rock the boat, right? Don't be someone who makes waves. Just go in, do your job. There's even the put your head down and work hard, and you'll be rewarded for that. So I think there are so many layers outside of just the general societal pressure to be that person who's easygoing, friendly, bubbly, and doesn't rock the boat, doesn't bring up problems, or doesn't challenge authority. And like you said, I do think it's getting better. And certainly sometimes it really depends on your team, on your company, on your manager, how much you're encouraged to stand out or stand up for yourself and to stand out. When I work with women on uncovering the power of their stories, and for a lot of times when I start working with women, they're also lacking confidence, and it might be something new. They're going through a period of, maybe they've had a toxic workplace or a difficult manager, or it might be something they've always struggled with. One of the first exercises I do with everyone, and I would encourage everyone listening to do this, is to make a list of the biggest turning points, the most pivotal moments in your life. So those are the moments that have changed the course of your life. It might be a big decision you made. It might be something that happened. It might be losing a loved one. It might be a new relationship. It might be becoming a parent or becoming an aunt or uncle. There are so many experiences we have that shift our perspective. And I find we rarely take the time to look at all of them together, right? You might have a conversation where you're like, oh, this happened and this really changed the way I look at things when when I had my first child, for example. But when you actually make that list and you look at everything that you have experienced that has changed the course of your life in one way or another, it's a really great way to start looking for patterns. So for example, when I did that exercise the first time, one thing I noticed is that a lot of my turning points happened from bold decisions that I made where I was stepping into something very much unknown. So I went to teach English in South Korea after doing my undergrad. Then I came back and moved to a city I'd never lived in before where I didn't know anyone. So those patterns are really helpful in identifying what I call core differentiators. These things that really set you apart and make you unique. And the reason I think that's so important in building your foundation and the foundation of your power stories is because if you don't know what really sets you apart, when you're asked the simplest question, like, tell me about yourself in a job interview, or a more complex question, like, tell me about a time you led through ambiguity, it's really hard to answer those questions in a way that sets you apart if you don't know what actually sets you apart as a person, right? You end up defaulting to really generic stories or really generic examples.
I love that idea though, because it's really understanding these big pivotal moments and how can I apply them with these big pivotal questions,
Yes.
right? In a way that I not only stay authentic to myself, but I feel like you're onto something, because it's a lot easier, I think, for our brain and our speech to be able to tell the story of something that I actually went through, rather than like, oh, let me think of that time that I like was in a meeting and I had an idea. Whereas like, oh, I can remember that time that I went to Korea and I took a big, huge chance and it ended up getting me the dream job that I wanted.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what that was like a perfect example to use, because that was a decision I made in my personal life that impacted how I behaved and made decisions in my professional life. And I think we often try to compartmentalize our personal lives and our professional lives. And of course there's a place for that, but there's also just so much crossover, and there is room for us to bring some of those personal experiences into professional situations when we can connect the dots. I was actually working with a woman named Sarah, and she'd been an individual contributor for 6 years. She wanted to move into a leadership position. And when we started working together, she was like, I really want to be a leader, but I don't have any leadership experience. So I'm not really sure how I'm going to, like, what am I going to talk about in job interviews? And so we did a deep dive on her experience, went through that exercise of her biggest turning points. And one of the things she wrote down was she received this award when she was playing varsity softball. And so I was like, oh, tell me more about that. So it was her last year playing varsity softball, and she'd had a tough year. She was feeling really frustrated. And then at the end of the year awards banquet, she gets called up on stage and given an award for leadership. She would describe herself as an introvert, and this leadership award, that as the coach was describing why she was receiving it, he said, Sarah is someone who leads with quiet, calm consistency, and she leads by example. And she said, that is the first time in my life that I realized I could be a leader, even though I was introverted. Like, she just had this story she was telling herself that she couldn't be a leader because she was an introvert. And so when she told me that, I was like, that's the entry point to your story. So in job interviews, she started to tell that story when they were like, oh, you've been an individual contributor for 6 years. Why the interest in leadership? And she would say, well, the first time I saw myself as a leader was actually when I received this award when I was playing varsity softball. And all of those qualities are exactly how I lead in the workplace today. I'm someone who's steady. I'm consistent. I won't be the loudest voice on your leadership team, but I will be that person you can always rely on to lead by example. And as someone who builds teams, I also see those leadership qualities in unconventional leaders who are rising up through the ranks, right? So it became this story from her personal life became this really beautiful entry point to her professional story.
Wow. I think that's so interesting and fascinating. And even like as I'm listening to you, I'm like, man, anybody who listens to you is going to hire you on the spot. So I'm curious when we're talking about lies we tell ourselves,
Hmm.
what do you think the biggest lies that we tell ourselves is that prevent us from getting the things that we want?
I don't have a story to tell, and I haven't really done anything
Mm.
special. Those are the things I hear the most often. And I will tell you, I've worked with hundreds of people. I've never met anyone who doesn't have a story. Everyone has a story to tell. But that other piece around, well, I haven't really done anything special. It is really hard to see the unique qualities in your own story, in your own life, because you're living it. So it just feels and seems normal to you. But I think probably we can all think of a moment where you were sharing something and someone said to you, like, what? Like, that's really cool, or that's really interesting, or you did that. And those are the moments it's so important to take note of and remember, like, hey, somebody else told me this was really interesting. I should really think about, is that something I should be talking about more? Also using that as something to build confidence, because as much as people come to me to work on the stories, they're telling others, the most important story is the story you're telling yourself.
Mm. So for those of us that are struggling or have challenges with confidence, right? Because like I'm listening to you and I think about myself. Before I started this podcast, I remember I would have like, well, like right when I started, I'd have guests on and I would, here and there talk about my life. And I would get like, wait, you were in the Marines, or wait, you did this. And I'm like, yeah, it's just normal. Like, what? I don't think it's anything
Yes.
a big deal. But the more I kind of detached from that, and I'm like, actually, holy shit, I've done a lot in my life that maybe others would look at as being, a kind of a wow, that's a very interesting or unique thing. But I found myself almost minimizing myself to fit in, right? To not be that person who stood out, to not be that person who felt judged, to not be that person who felt misunderstood or unvalued. So let me just like fit in with the crowd and not come off like I'm cocky or like I'm too into myself. So I'm just going to keep it at a minimum. So for those that are dealing with challenges of minimizing and confidence, what do you say to those people, to especially women who are listening, who want to be more confident, especially in their careers?
Most women are really comfortable doing almost anything when they feel like it's helping someone else, right? And I'm obviously generalizing here, but in general, we love as women to support other people, to help other people. So something I find really helpful is to ask yourself, how is sharing this going to help someone else? How is sharing this story how can I be of service to other people by sharing this experience? And, you asked me this question at the beginning. When was the first time you realized your voice, was important and could have an impact? And when I left TV, one of the reasons I left is because I was really struggling with my mental health. I was on the outside, had this extremely successful career. I had, shot up through the industry really quickly. But behind the scenes, I was dealing with racism and sexism and discrimination, and it really took a toll on me. And when I left TV, I had a lot of shame and I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to share what had happened with anyone. I tried to brush it under the rug as often as I could and play it off like, oh, there's a lot of instability in the industry. I just wanted to find a job that in an industry that was growing and where I could find more opportunities for success and make more money and all of those things. When in reality, I was sort of fighting this battle behind the scenes. But when I started working with high school girls, that's when I realized, wow, by hiding that story, it's a disservice to other people because now nobody can learn from that experience. Now that thing that I went through that was really difficult is just this dark period in my life. Whereas if I can share that story, if I can help other people with it, all of a sudden this darkness becomes lighter, right? And so that's why I started to talk more about that whole experience. And it started with the girls I was mentoring. And then I started to share more broadly on podcasts, on my social media. And what I found is so many people reached out to me saying, thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going through the same thing, right? People in all kinds of industries. And so I think if you're someone who's thinking, I don't want to talk about myself. I don't think that what I'm going to say has value. Try to think about it in a way that, where you're asking this question, is sharing this story going to help others? Is there a way for me to share this to help others? I think that's a really good way to start. And the reality is when you start doing something to help others, you often end up helping yourself. And those first few times can be scary, right? But that's how you build confidence in doing it, is to take those first few steps and to think about it in that way so you don't feel like it's self-serving.
Well, there's a vulnerability that's there, right? And whenever there's a vulnerability that's opening, there's a potential for rejection.
Yes.
Right? Like if we were to like take it down the layers, it's like, okay, rejection, shame, maybe even abandonment, and we're hardwired to not want to be rejected. We don't want to be rejected from our partners, from our families, from our societies, from the people that we work with. And so vulnerability is scary, but you touched on something that I think is a really, really great opportunity and door for those of you that are listening. When I started this podcast, right, it was a scary thing. And I'm like, I don't know if anyone's going to listen. I don't know if what I have to say matters. But let me tell you, the moments of doubt, which I still have, by the way, I've been doing this for 4 years. I think it's my 4th year. The moments of doubt when I'm like, do I really want to keep doing this? It's a lot of work. Who's really listening? Because I stopped checking the numbers. I used to religiously check my downloads, religiously check my rankings. I stopped. I haven't checked my rankings or my downloads in about 2 years or so. I'm guessing I'm still up there. Let's hope that I am. But I stopped because I was focusing more on that, and my purpose felt ungrounded. But let me tell you, the moment that I get a message from someone that says, hey, I just need to tell you this episode that you did or what you shared helped me get out of this abusive relationship, it all becomes so therapeutic and worth it for me for me personally, when I found that my voice is not only telling my truth, that in a world where I felt I had to shrink, and I felt growing up that my voice didn't matter, where people think it matters, and it helped them to do something better. And I'm telling you, that in its singularity was the most powerful impact from my purpose that I think I've ever had, was using my voice for a purpose in a time where we are being told to shrink and to be quiet. And so that's powerful. What you're doing is powerful.
Oh, that I love the way you put that. It's so, because you're right. And I feel the same way. Those messages from people, like, that is what keeps me going. Or when, one of my clients gets a great job or gets a raise or promotion. And also the confidence that comes from like a woman messaging you and saying, listening to your story gave me the confidence to leave an abusive relationship. Like, how to know that your voice has that kind of impact. I mean, it's so powerful. And I think it's so important for everyone listening to realize that you and I we're not special in that way. Like, of course we're special, but anyone's voice can make a difference, right? And we all have the power to make that difference and to use our stories to help other people. And I think, like, you are so good at what you do because first of all, you're an amazing listener. But also because I think exactly what you said shines through in your podcasting, where you just genuinely have a passion for sharing information, for like using your voice to support other people. And I think that really shines through.
Oh, thank you. And I appreciate that. I'm telling you, my throat chakra is wide open for you all chakra people. Mine's open. And I'm curious for you. So I want to kind of go back to, your career. You went from media to tech, completely different worlds. You've done stuff. You really have done different things within your career. How do you deal, or how did you deal with the voice in your head that maybe said, I'm not qualified for this, I'm not good enough? Because I don't know about y'all listening, but I have 100%, like even with my podcasting, I'm like, man, maybe this isn't going to be the big Joe Rogan podcast that I wanted it to be. I want to kick him off the chart so I can move in there. Or maybe I'm not a good therapist, or maybe am I helping people? Am I not? I get those thoughts too. So how did you deal with that little voice that says you're not, Priya, you're not qualified to do this?
I think the way I've dealt with it it's changed in different situations. So, when I first I mentioned I worked in this smaller newsroom at the beginning of my TV career. And then I was asked to take a 1-year contract on the network's national morning show. And I had a lot of imposter syndrome in that move, because I was all of a sudden working with these journalists that I had spent my whole career admiring and studying and learning from. And all of a sudden I was sitting next to them. And, I would say, I think you could tell for the first little while. I really think you could tell. And then I started getting messages from people who were like, "Oh, you're such a great addition to this show. Like, you bring a completely different perspective." And then I started to think, oh, I've got so focused on, I have to measure up to these people. I have to be just like them, when actually people like that I'm not like them. And sometimes we get so caught up in being what we think. Sometimes it's even what we think other people think we should be. And sometimes it is what other people think we should be, that we forget that we're actually bringing something different to the table. And that if you get rid of that, then all of a sudden you're just like everyone else. And so that was something that I really leaned into. I remember somebody actually said to me, because I was very stiff, I would say, for the first little while, and it wasn't a secret. And somebody said to me, people always said, you really just need to be yourself on TV, And I'm like, yeah, what does that even mean? And like, yeah, just be yourself with 8 cameras and all these bright lights in your face.
Right.
But then, right. I was, over the holidays, I was, with my family, and we were sitting in the living room. My family loves puns, like just the cheesiest, worst jokes.
Mm-hmm.
And, we're all laughing, and I was like, oh, this is me being myself. And so the next week when I went back, I was like, let me try doing some puns on air. And people loved it. I was getting and it was people who were like, oh my gosh, cringe, but like, haha, like that was like something different. And people were like, I love your puns. I couldn't wait for like the commercial break to be over to see what you were going to say next. So then I started like that's just one example, but it really made me lean further into just being me. And so I try to come back to that in those moments where, I am, like, what does this person want to hear in this specific interview? And instead of, I try to flip that and say, but who do I want to show up as? And what actually naturally sets me apart that I can bring to this interview or to this conversation? And when I first interviewed for my first tech job, I was up against an internal candidate. And so I knew like I have no tech experience. I obviously have no internal knowledge. I can't try to be this person. I can't try to compete with that. So what I need to lean even further into is my storytelling skills, my presentation skills. I need to lean even further into what sets me apart and not even try to touch those things that I don't have. And I did. And I got the job over that internal candidate because I could show that I was bringing something completely different to the table. So I think it's really leaning in to those differentiators that you have.
So how do we deal with the rejection and the failures, right? Because that's enough to completely just say, this isn't for me. I'm not going to try. I don't want to be rejected again. I don't want to fail. Or maybe somebody really looks at something as this was a complete and utter failure. Why would I try this again? What do you say to people who struggle with the conception of rejection and failure, and how do we overcome that? Because that's a powerful thing to keep us stuck.
Yes. And I want to start my answer to this question by saying that those experiences suck. Like that's really hard. I'm not the person who's going to say, well, rejection is redirection. Rejection is It's tough. And do I think it's redirection? I do. But I also think in the moment, that's not the message you need. You need some time to just feel that like, this is really hard, especially the job market right now is so hard, right? I talk to women who are like, I've done 60 interviews in the last year and I still haven't been hired. Like,
Wow.
That's really, really, really hard. One of the books that really shifted my mentality on rejection and failure is The Gap and the Gain. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that one, but
I'm writing it down.
Okay, it's a great book, and it's sort of in the context of business. But to be honest, I think anyone can really learn from this concept. And as an entrepreneur, I mean, you know as well as I do, it's a roller coaster, right? Like you said, you still have moments of questioning yourself. So do I. And what I've learned from that is to let myself have that time. I try to give myself a limit depending on how deep the rejection was. You know, sometimes it's 5 minutes, sometimes it's a day. But then I go into this gain mindset, which is what did I gain from this? And how do I find the gain from this? So if, you know, I applied for something, I got rejected. After, it's like, what was the gain? Did I make a new contact on LinkedIn through this process? Did I get to do an interview? Maybe it's a presentation. Maybe it was an interview assignment, something I didn't do before that I learned from. Like, you need to find what one thing that was a gain from that experience so that you can continue to move forward and not only think about that as being a rejection. So finding the gain in any situation after you've given yourself some time, that has been such a game changer for me and also for my clients.
I like that because I feel like there's lessons in everything we do, right?
Yes.
Like that's how I look at relationships. You know, every failed dating that I've had, which I've had a lot of failed dating, stay married, by the way, it's hard out here, has been met with what lesson can I take from my own growth? Right. And so I think we can apply that even within our careers or any rejection that we have in our life of like, what can I take? Because I'm not any less of a person than I was before this rejection. So if there's something I can take from that or have learned from that or have grown from that, there must be something here that I can say is a win. I'm curious to hear your take on entrepreneurship. So just for some context, I'll put myself as an example. I worked for the government for many, many years. I was in the military. Then I worked for the prison system. Then I worked for the veteran affairs system. And I was that person that I'm like, I'm going to work for the government until I retire. That was the plan. What I didn't realize is that the universe had a different plan for me, and media was one of them, and it just happened, right? And then therefore I ended up getting into my private practice. But let me tell you, the jump from a 9 to 5 to working for myself full time was one of the scariest leaps I have ever made in my life. And I've done a lot of crazy shit. Okay. But there was something about, I don't know if this is for me. I don't know if I'm good enough. What if I don't make enough money? What if? Now, here I am a year later, best decision I ever made. I could never even fathom going back. So what do you say to anyone who's listening, who's like, man, I would love to like jump in. I would love to just work for myself. What advice do you give to people who are starting to think about it, but are just frozen and can't make the move?
I ask 2 questions. So the first one is, when have you done something in your life that you really wanted? When have you set your sights on something you really wanted that didn't work out? And most people who are even thinking about entrepreneurship are like, oh, that's never happened to me. And I'm like, so why would this be any different? And the second thing is, what is the worst thing that can happen? And for most people, it's, well, I'd have to go back to my 9 to 5. Okay. So like, you'd be in the same place you're in right now. Well, yeah. Okay. Is that so bad? If you leave for a year, it doesn't work out and then you go back? Well, no. So all of a sudden, like, I find those 2 questions, it's just like, oh, well, now this doesn't seem so bad. Right. And you know, there are so many different levels of privilege in those situations too, right? Like, do you have savings?
Mhm.
Of course, like there are all of these practical elements to it too. But I do find those two questions give a lot of perspective.
Yeah, so I have to acknowledge privilege, right? I'm a veteran, so all my healthcare is through the VA. My daughter's good to go. So the biggest healthcare question was taken care of, right? And so, but that wasn't what was keeping me stuck. It wasn't, it was the money and the security and the pension, and oh my God, I have to do my own retirement. But you know what? I figured it out.
Yeah.
I read a book. I opened a high yield savings account. I opened up a Roth IRA. I opened up a traditional. I did it all myself, and I had to learn to do it. But I gained so much more.
Yes.
I gained financial freedom. I gained time freedom. Time freedom. Yes, it came with other stressors because now I'm working for myself, and taxes are a bitch. Let me tell you.
They are. They are.
However, and then the U.S. is, I don't know how Canada is, but the U.S. is crazy. But there's so much gain that came out of that by really facing what lies was I telling myself. You help a lot of women land raises, promotions, leadership roles. And this might be kind of repeating the question, but if you were to give like one tactical change someone can make this week to start owning their power through story, what would it be?
Yes. One, I think when we were chatting earlier about finding those things that set you apart, and how it can be hard to do it for yourself. If you're someone who is already in a workplace, you already have, you have colleagues and peers, start by asking other people. Like if you're struggling to find like what actually does set me apart, start by asking the people around you, what is it about working with me that's different from, working with other people with the same job title? Or, if you have someone you have a really good working relationship with, ask them like, why do you think we work so well together? Like, what do you think I'm bringing to the table that makes this work so well? And those are really great ways to start building that story that you can then tell. And when we speak about the confidence piece, it's also really good for that, for helping you to see those things in yourself, right? Because you're probably really good at what you do and you're bringing something to the table, but to get that specificity and to hear it from someone else, it's a really good tactical step to take in that direction.
Do you think communication is a skill set, or are some people just naturally better communicators?
I definitely think it's a skill set. I think anyone can learn to be a better communicator. And I definitely see that happen a lot in my programs. So my dad was a United Church minister. So he was like the pastor in church every Sunday. And so I saw him communicating every week. So do I feel like I learned a lot from that? Absolutely. And I think some people I think it's easy to be like, oh, it's just, she's charismatic, or she's just like has those communication skills. But those were also learned. I just happened to learn them at a young age because of what I was surrounded by. And then to obviously to continue to develop them over time. But I do believe that anyone can learn those skills.
I mean, listen, we were talking behind the scenes. She's a triple cap, y'all. So I know, like, listen, I'm not saying that Capricorns are not good communicators. They are, but like, the charismatic thing that must be somewhere else in your chart, because usually Capricorns are like very, but I think it is a skill, right? It's something that we can learn to be like really good communicators, even if you're more introverted, even if it's not something that you've had a lot of experience with, because there are some people that I really want to acknowledge that have real trauma, who have learned to quiet and minimize themselves because that's what helped keep them safe. Like I was one of them, right? My voice was not, you don't talk back. You don't say anything. You be quiet. And that's the safest way to get through the day. But I've learned that using my voice was the only way to get what I needed in a way that worked for me. But I just had to learn to communicate it in a way that, I don't want to say played the game, but was able to work through the system with the path of least resistance. right?
Yes.
Which is what nature wants. Water's going to flow with the path of least resistance, but we like to fight shit. And so
Yes.
how can we do these things without fighting it in a way that's easier for us? For you, what's the one thing that you wish someone had told you about your voice when you were just getting started?
I wish that I had been able to hear my voice more. I wish someone had said, listen to your own voice and stop listening to all of the voices around you. Because when I think about even me 10 years ago, I couldn't hear my own voice. I was so focused on, what do my parents think? What do my colleagues think? What do my friends think? What do the people reading my Instagram posts think? That I didn't even know what my own voice sounded like. It was so quiet. And I feel like I actually was almost trying to like suppress that voice because it was causing me problems. Because that voice was like, you should leave TV. You aren't happy, and I didn't lean into that. So I do wish, as much as I wouldn't change anything that had happened because it's made me who I am today. I do wish I had been able to hear that voice more clearly, because I do think it would have saved me some pain. And now, that's the first voice I go to. And that voice is so clear to me now. And it doesn't mean I don't care what anyone else thinks. I still wish I cared less sometimes. But I at least, yeah, right. But I at least can hear that voice really clearly now.
Well, Priya, thank you for the work that you do. I think it's important when we live in a society that's still dominated by men, and to be a role model of not only a woman, but a woman of color who is doing this, because we need representation to say, like, actually, hey, we have voices that matter and we got shit to say. So thank you. And thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I could talk to you all day. This was wonderful.